Chris, what do you think will happen, if anything, to reform the tax code this year? Do you think the corporate tax rate should be lowered? And do you see incentives for corporations who keep or bring jobs back to the United States happening?
So the corporate tax code is like the individual tax code in that there's a rate, but then there's just millions of credits and deductions and exceptions that have allowed a lot of the biggest corporate tax players in this country, like GE, who is a great Connecticut company. I'm a big fan of GE, and so I don't demonize them for this fact, but they paid no taxes in several of the last few years. Not because they did anything wrong, but because they just took the existing laws and offset all of their profits with losses and investments so that they didn't pay any taxes. And that just doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense that the big American companies aren't paying anything to the federal government in terms of federal taxes. That being said, the overall corporate tax rate in this country is too high. It's too high because if you aren't able to sort of take an army of accountants and figure your way out of paying it, you're paying a rate that is much higher. I mean, I think it's 30% higher than any other country in the world. And it was okay to have a really high corporate tax rate back when it was hard to move a corporation. Today it's not hard to move a corporation. You can move it anywhere pretty easily. And so corporations are moving overseas because they just don't want to pay our tax rate, and they're taking a lot of jobs with them. So what I'd argue is that you should lower the corporate tax rate, bring it down to something in the 20s, and just get rid of a lot of the exceptions and deductions and credits so that everyone is paying a basic rate, that we have a floor to say that no one's going to pay less than 15%. And no one's going to pay more than 25%, instead of today where you're paying anywhere from 0 to the 30s. So we got to admit that some of our tax rates are just too high, and the corporate tax rate is way too high right now. And if you want to be competitive as a nation, then you have to accept that corporations are just going to move to where their taxes are the lowest, and they are too. And unless you can find all those ways out of paying taxes, they're the highest here in the country. So and that's a place that Republicans and Democrats generally agree on, that corporate tax rate codes rates are too high. So hopefully we can get that done.
Might be a good one to leave off on. We've had a lot of discussion here about guns, but what we need to talk about is jobs. What will you be doing to try to bring jobs back from other countries? And what about an import tax on these items coming into the country?
Yeah, so listen, this still is the most important issue, right? I mean, this still is the most important issue, which is the fact that there are way too many people that are out of work. And I'm not saying that we get distracted by talking about these other things. These other things are still very important. But shame on this Congress if it spends all its time talking about other issues besides job creation, because that is still what people care about. Let me tell you the piece that I care about most, because we could spend another half an hour, hour and a half, 3 hours talking about job creation. I care about manufacturing jobs. It is what made this town. It's what made this state. We still have a bigger portion of our economy in Connecticut dedicated to manufacturing than the country as a whole. And the only way this economy survives is if we make things. We absolutely cannot become a service sector, financial sector based economy. We've got to make things to sell to the rest of the world. In part because China and India and all these places, they're buying things, and they're going to be buying more and more and more things, and we better be the place that makes them. So how do we do that? One, we stop signing dumb trade agreements. We stop signing trade agreements we stop signing. I agree that free trade theoretically is the direction we should be going in, but when you sign a trade agreement, it's your one chance to sit across the table from that country and say, raise your environmental standards, raise your labor standards, meet ours, not in 1 year, but at least in 10 years, and start to act like the rest of the civilized world when it comes to how you treat the water and the air and your workers. And if we did that, we would be in a lot better place from a cost standpoint. The second thing I believe in is use our tax policy to incentivize companies that want to create jobs here rather than companies that send jobs overseas, right? That is a pretty easy thing to do, but I will tell you, far too much of our economic policy in Washington has been controlled by big multinational companies that have an incentive in creating U.S. policies that send jobs overseas. And then third, the federal government has to practice what it preaches, and here's what I mean by that. we are the biggest purchaser of goods in the country from manufacturers, mainly through the Defense Department. 70% of US purchasing is from the Defense Department, but Homeland Security is buying a lot of stuff, the Department of Transportation is buying a lot of stuff. So we can do a lot if we just say that when we send our taxpayer dollars to Washington, they are going to be used to buy things from companies that are located in the United States. We have. And so this topic, and it's a good one to end on, because this topic is perhaps the one that I am most passionate about. I have sort of founded a movement, not a movement, but I founded a group in Washington called the Buy America movement. When I've gone to small manufacturers here in Connecticut, they tell me over and over again that they used to sell to Pratt & Whitney and to Electric Boat, but now those companies buy their parts from overseas. And the federal law, which used to require that you buy everything from American companies, now lets these prime contractors buy more and more parts from China and India and Mexico and all over the world. And that's just insane for two reasons. One, it kills millions of American jobs. We think that if you just cleaned up the loopholes in what's called the Buy America law, you could pretty quickly create 600,000 new jobs here. But second, it's also incredibly damaging to our national defense. When we stop making the copper nickel tubing for the US subfleet in the United States, a very specialized process that only a handful of manufacturers in the world can do, we will never recreate it in this country. And when the country that's making the copper nickel tubing to us, which could be Mexico or it could be Germany, those are the only other two places that make them, when they decide to not be our friends any longer, then we can't make submarines any longer. And so so from a national security standpoint, we got to make that stuff here. Anyway, I could talk about this forever because I just think, well, I think we covered as many topics as we can. Guys. So,
Chris, relative to the last point,
listen, I don't.
the White House,
I don't want to take.
this is relating to exactly what you were just talking about.
I'll take
Could you
it.
just comment
I'll
on
take it.
that
I'll take
in the
it.
last week, what the White House
I
has
can't.
proposed
I can't read it.
in terms
I
of,
can't read it.
well, okay,
All right.
I'll leave this
All right,
with
let
you
me
later.
leave it with you. So, okay. Listen, what I'll do. I don't want this to sort of get out of control. But for folks that are, and we couldn't get to every single question here. But you know, we've. So no, we tried to get it. We tried to get a sample of all questions. I'll be happy to, for folks that want to talk a little bit more about the Second Amendment issues. I'm happy to, because I know that that's a real passionate issue for folks, and I'm happy to stick around and talk more about that issue. So, and for people that have not had their questions answered, we'll get them all answered for people. So. Well, listen, we'll try to get to as many as we can here, and I try to be as quick as we can. But I'll be happy to stick around and talk a little bit. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate it. Hey, how are you?